Your ballot, your bucks. Now, Neil Cavuto.
All right, we have got a lot going on this morning. Welcome, everybody. Waiting to hear Donald Trump deliver what he's calling his closing argument, his case for what a first 100 days of a Trump administration would be like. And he's doing it on hallowed ground in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from the exact location where Abraham Lincoln delivered about a 2.5-minute speech that goes down in history as perhaps one of the greatest ever. Donald Trump hopes the tide from that and some of the wind at his back and some recent poll numbers will be enough to start sealing this deal. Don't laugh. He thinks he could do just that. We're going to be talking to Pat Buchanan about this, Mark Cuban about this, Steve Wynn about this. Also, some big developments in the corporate world. I don't know if you have AT&T. I don't know if you watch any of the Time Warner channels like, heaven forbid, CNN, TNT, TBS, or you're into any one of the Time Warner film movies like any of the Harry Potter series. It could be a combination, an $85 billion combination. More on that deal and what it could be portending amid talk that AT&T and Time Warner are close to hooking up. There is this other little issue of regulators. All right, let's first focus on the big speech about an hour away. Peter Doocy is there. Peter.
And Neil, this to-do list that Trump is going to give us about an hour from right now, around 11 o'clock Eastern, is happening here in Gettysburg for a reason. And the reason is that this is where President Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address at a time the nation needed healing. And the campaign says Trump thinks that he can make the case for his policies over Clinton's policies in a way that could convince voters to unite around him, the way they did around Lincoln a century and a half ago. So Trump has to get to the White House before any of this happens. And now he is urgently encouraging people in swing states to vote for him today if they can.
Early voting is underway, so make sure you send in your ballot. We cannot take a chance of blowing it. We cannot take a chance. We have something, we're so close. It's a movement like they've never seen in this country before, never, ever seen. Don't blow it on November 8th.
Trump has been hinting recently that he will not accept the results of a close election if he's on the losing end, and half of Republicans are with him because half of Republicans say in a new Reuters poll they would not accept Hillary Clinton as their president, with 70% indicating the only way they think she could win is if there's illegal voting aiding her along. Trump does hold slight leads in several national tracking polls this weekend, but he is playing catch up in swing states, and that's what it's all about. So Pennsylvania does appear to be a priority. He's down 6 and change in the Real Clear Politics average of polls here, but he came to Pennsylvania twice yesterday. He's going to be here once today. He's also hitting Virginia and Ohio this afternoon and this evening. So some swing states are going to get the big final argument from Donald Trump, but we're going to hear it first here in Gettysburg at 11 o'clock. So stay tuned.
All right, thank you, my friend Peter Doocy. As Peter's speaking, we are getting dribs and drabs of what Mr. Trump might be outlining today, something like a modern-day contract with America. Remember back in 1994, Republicans charged, before they ultimately took over the House of Representatives, for complete regulatory reform, tax reform, welfare reform, something very similar out of Mr. Trump. He is going to call for immigration reform, regulatory reform, tax cuts, tighter border security, all outlined in what we're told will be about a 10-point plan. And it is said to be Lincoln-esque, hence the Gettysburg location. All right, now the question is whether any of this will reverse what have been some tough polls and certainly a lot of negative headlines. Take a look at how the media has all but put this one away. The Washington Post, Trump is bitter, hoarse, and pondering defeat as Election Day nears. And on as you just look at these headlines. Thank you, Donald Trump. Donald Trump could well go down in history as a feminist hero. In other words, saying that his comments will galvanize the female vote and he will be buried by it. And as you could see, the idea of an example that Richard Nixon could teach Donald Trump, all but assuming he's going to lose this race and take a cue from Richard Nixon, not to whine about it. Jimmy pollster Lee Carter. Lee, he's in Pennsylvania.
He is in Pennsylvania.
And he trails there by, I guess, depending on the poll, 6 points or so. Mm-hmm. Normally when candidates trail by that much, they move on. to other states. Not all the time. He's not. Why not?
So there's a couple of reasons why. I think the first reason is Pennsylvania is the easiest path to victory for him right now. What he needs to do is a couple of things. First, he has to shore up all those states that Romney won. Then he has to win Florida and Ohio. Then the last thing he has to do is either win Pennsylvania or a series of other small states, and that's going to be a little bit more challenging for him. Pennsylvania has not gone Republican since 1988. It's going to be a challenge for him, but he is within 6 points. The trends right now there are away from Hillary Clinton. He's got a little bit of a bump in recent days, and we also see that there's still a significant number of undecided voters. Depending on the poll, you're seeing between 5 and 10 points undecided. So he's really within the margin of error in Pennsylvania. I also think we're living in a day and age where we're more nationwide. He can go, obviously he can go in person, but these kinds of moments, going to Gettysburg is going to get him a lot of media coverage, and he's able to have a symbolic gesture at that moment saying, he's going to get in front, he's going to give a big speech today that we think is going to be symbolic of what he's going to offer and offer a big plan that can then catapult him in other states. So I think that he's using this both for the symbolism and because the state is really important to him.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what do pollsters look for when you were examining the data coming in from the states? You don't look at what the aggregate number is, but you also look at what the trend is. And she has slipped down a little bit. He's moved up a little bit. And I guess if you're Donald Trump, you want to keep that going. And an address like this could do it. But you have about 2 weeks to close the deal.
So what I look at is exactly what you're saying, the numbers themselves, but also the momentum. Where are things shifting? I also am a big believer in qualitative research, to try and talk to voters and say, what are they saying? I think the most important thing to understand about Donald Trump, and I think this is just, it's not necessarily about the man, it's about the movement. He is representative of an anti-establishment movement where people are saying, you know what, enough of the establishment, whether it's Republican or Democrat. For the last 16 years, we haven't had a real strong faith and belief in government. People believe that whether you like Donald Trump or not, he's going to go in and he's going to shake things up and he's going to change things. Now, the question is, do people look at him and say, you know what, I think he's going to do it for the best. I think that I can trust him not to be crazy. I mean, there is this whole
But that's a split read, right? I mean, we're going to rifle through very quickly here some of the latest polls that show even safe states or safe Republican states might not be so safe. Georgia's a big example, almost always goes Republican, and he's barely holding on there. People seize on that in states like Texas and the fact that Ohio is split when he had been up by 3 points, and they say, hey, he's the one losing the momentum. What do you say?
Well, he did lose the momentum, there's no question. But what we've seen in this race, and this has been like unlike anything that we've ever seen before. We have, it's 1 minute it's shifting towards Hillary Clinton, the next week 10 points over to Donald Trump, the next week back 10 points to Hillary Clinton. The swings are phenomenal.
But are the swings up or down for him? Because I see Hillary Clinton's numbers, the overall number not changing a lot. It's
her overall number has not changed all that much. At certain points in time it has, but she has pretty much solidly hit herself around 45 right now, and that's where she has stayed. And so it's the undecideds that are up to 10 points, and some states are even up to as high as 20 that are going up and down and really going for him based on news cycles and what people are thinking of him in a moment. The whole label of Donald Trump being dangerous is one that really sticks, and people in moments are looking at it and saying, am I going to trust him to change things for the better, or is it going to be change that scares me and he could be dangerous? And so we're swinging back and forth. It's vacillating. What he needs to do now is stay on message, stay on track, stay calm, cool, and collected, not veer off. He's got to stay the course right now. He's got to have 3 weeks, just like he had those 3 weeks when Kellyanne Conway first joined the campaign. Everything really seemed to stay focused. And he can do it, but he needs to do that to shore things up right now.
All right, Lee, thank you very, very much. In the meantime, in case you woke up this morning, a big merger to tell you about, or at least they want it to be something to tell you about, and that regulators will approve. I am talking right now about AT&T plunking down $85 billion for Time Warner. Now, this is the same AT&T that not too long ago paid about $50 billion to buy DirecTV. They've got a lot of debt there, a lot of questions going forward as to why now, because this is just one of the bigger deals we've seen either announced or rumored over the last week. A record number of them, and certainly a record amount. What's going on here, and what's the rush? To Steve Forbes, Gary Kalpa. Gary, ended with you, beginning with you. What is the rush?
Well, first off, I think you have this easy money that creates low interest rates and high stock prices, so you have the currency. But on top of that, you have companies that are not growing anymore, so they have to look elsewhere to buy. And as you see, like in the British tobacco, their sales are down 11% year over year. So go after Reynolds, who, by the way, bought Lorillard for $27 billion a couple of years ago. And then you add into political front, there's going to be two names that starting in January, it looks that way, and that is Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They are going to be involved a big way in the economy, and they do not like big business, and they are loath to let businesses grow. So I think the rush is on right now, and I think we're going to see more of this, not less.
You know, Steve, normally when the smart money crowd are those who have a lot of money and are making their bets, they're telling us something is about to happen. I don't know whether it's a political response, a sense of the Federal Reserve finally poised to raise interest rates, deals won't be as cheap in the future, but they all seem to be bouncing at the same time. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's been indicated the economy is not growing very much. Growth, there's been a lot of M&A activity, a lot of stock buying back in, financial engineering, and business capital expenditures aren't what they should be. So growth is coming by gobbling up your competitors. And what we have here with what AT&T is doing is the old traditional lines, which have been crumbling anyway, are now crashing down. People are not taking those old packages. Wireless telephony is really hurting right now. Verizon sales of subscribers are going down. So you're looking around, your world is coming down. So you grasp to try to get something that may boost you up, because you don't know how this thing is going to play out. If you don't have a playbook, you grasp what you can and hope you find something that can make you a winner in the future. But there is no clear path, and that's very clear.
You know, Gary, one of the things you've always reminded me over the years is the markets have bore uncertainty. A new element of uncertainty for the markets have been, they've kind of factored in, they might be wrong, a Hillary Clinton victory. And again, I stress they could be very wrong. But another variable that they've had to wrestle with is the possibility she takes the Senate or the House with her. Why would that unnerve them? Just help me with that.
Well, I think a lot of the media talks about how Hillary Clinton's a moderate. I'm not so sure about that when you are mentioning Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in your debates and complimenting them. These are people that are high tax, anti-business, and they'll be proud to tell you that. So if that's the case and the Dems get both the House and the Senate, we're talking about some worrisome stuff. And let me be clear, if the government grows, the economy slows. This year, government spending was $3.9 trillion. In the year 2000, it was $1.8 trillion. We're talking about $2 trillion more coming out of the economy into the coffers of Washington, D.C. The economy has no chance if we continue to go up. And by the way, 2017, budget of $4.2 trillion. The economy does not have a chance if that trajectory continues.
Steve, real quickly, markets and economies generally do best, not all the time, but generally, when there's a split government. The White House in one party's hands, the Senate and/or House in another party's hands. Of course, remember that in the mid-90s after the Republicans took over the House, and how that really led to booming times, and the Clinton boom, as they called it then. I'm sure Newt Gingrich called it the Gingrich boom. But what do you make of that, and that might not be the case, and that's maybe precipitating a lot of these deals?
Yes, that kind of uncertainty. And this idea, and Gary's right, that Hillary Clinton is a moderate with her inner bill waiting to get out is preposterous. Remember, she gave us Hillary care back in the mid-1990s, which was even more for the radical than Obamacare. She wants a single-payer system. And so she wants revenge for what happened to her 20 years ago. Ooh. So this idea that she's some kind of an inner moderate is just wrong, and the markets, I think, are beginning to sense that that could be the case, especially if she gets the Senate and the House. By golly, you're going to see the market tank, and a lot of people are going to be scrambling. How do we survive the next 2 years, 4 years?
All right. And just as many people say Donald Trump gets in there unexpectedly, the markets could tank. All these guys are just ridiculous. Not you guys, of course. Thank you both very, very much. All right, on the left of your screen, the scene in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We're waiting to hear from Donald Trump. And on this whole issue about the mainstream media and Mark Cuban ranting at a Donald Trump over just that after this.
When you have a candidate who says they don't believe in the outcome of a presidential election in this country, that's denying democracy.
All right, forget about the context in which Donald Trump expressed reservations about the election results, maybe given the fact that we had the experience in 2000 with Al Gore. All right, so that was then. Barack Obama saying that it helps the Democrats in control of the machines. Now, all of a sudden, everyone's aghast at Donald Trump, given the experiences that we've seen in our recent history, would say, well, I'd have to wait and see. I'd have to wait and see about the outcome of the election and what happened in certain precincts, counties, et cetera, i.e. Florida. You know the drill. So does this fellow, former Democratic pollster Pat Goodell. You know, I don't think he said anything outlandish there, Pat. That is Donald Trump. Given our experiences, given what we see, I guess a lot would depend on the magnitude of either victory. If it's Donald Trump or if it's Hillary Clinton, maybe if Hillary Clinton wins in a landslide, maybe there's less to protest there. But what do you make of this dust-up?
Well, what I make of it is a lot of hypocrisy. First of all, you know, we've had problems with elections for a long time, and you know, we have incidents in Indiana, we have incidents in Wisconsin in the last election. People on election, particularly this election day voting, registration on election day voting. But we go back to 1960, you go back to that disputed election, and everyone was talking about Chicago, and then Daley offered to recount the votes if the Republicans downstate would recount the votes, and that was the end of that. Nobody wanted to pick that challenge up. These things go on. Look, and we have them. We have 2000. We have what happened in Florida. Some of it inadvertent, some of it, was intentional. I mean, we had the Gore campaign saying we want to count all the votes, only the ones actually we want to count, not all the ones, including the overseas ballots. You know, this stuff that gets very hairy when you get down to electoral votes. 2008, look what happened in Minnesota. Al Franken is a senator and defeated Norm Coleman because the Secretary of State, elected by the George Soros effort to Democracy Alliance effort to elect Secretary of States, allowed ballots in there, and the courts did, of people who were not legally had a right to vote. And that election got stolen right from under him. But you know, the
criticism, real quickly, Pat, very quickly, I apologize, is that Donald Trump seemed to be presupposing it will be rigged. That's the
I think he's got a right to say, let us see, at a cosmic level, this race is rigged. It is rigged by the media, which is only covering some stories and
he's right
not
about
covering
that.
others.
Distorted coverage. But
let me tell you something. In a larger sense, the establishment has been rigging that. We've got these polls, there's some of them which are really crazy. And, we have a lot of things going on. He does have the right to say, well, we'll see what happens. Obviously, we'll see what happens. It's not a big deal.
All right. Yeah, I thought the whole segment was a waste of time myself.
Look at Ohio in 2004.
Right, I beg you to stop.
Oh, my God,
I beg you to stop. You're stopping now. Pat Goodell, you are a genius, my friend. Right. Thank you very much. Pat Goodell, meanwhile, very excited about this Gettysburg event. He was there when Abraham Lincoln spoke. Now, even more excited. Donald Trump is. Stay with us. What is a fair share to you?
Well, it's a perfectly intelligent question. So how do we define fair share? 70% of the tax revenues paid to the United States government and income tax come from 5% of the citizens. Now, that would suggest that something unfair is going on. So when you hear a politician say fair share, you're talking about hypocritical political propaganda. You are not talking about an intelligent discussion of who is paying what and who isn't paying taxes. The minute someone talks about fair share, you're probably talking to a thief.
That was from Las Vegas with Steve Wynn. I think that was his way of saying, I got your fair share right here. Welcome back, everybody. I wanted to give you a quick peek of what's going on in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Wouldn't it be interesting if Abraham Lincoln had to go through this? Like, oh, he's about to make a speech right now. I see him now with the top hat. Now, fast forward a little over a century, and we're waiting for Donald Trump using that venue, as many presidential candidates, indeed presidents have, half a dozen of them, the venue and the backdrop of Gettysburg to pitch a point. And in this case, Donald Trump, a 10-point economic plan that is uplifting and positive, flying in the face of media critics who say he's Mr. Doom and Gloom on the campaign stump. I don't think that's fair, but then again, is the way it's been portrayed. We'll see if Donald Trump can reverse that sense and maybe reverse some poll numbers. I've got Donald Trump Finance Committee member Anthony Scaramucci, Fox Business Network's Kennedy. She's just like, it's like Madonna, just Kennedy. I'm Democratic strategist Jessica Tarlow. She's sticking with the first and the last name.
For now.
For now. What do you make of what Steve Wynn was saying? Hillary Clinton keeps beating the drum. Higher taxes on the rich, higher taxes on the rich to pay for all of this.
I think that he's right, and I think that she's right to keep doing it. You know, this was one of the more salient points in the primary campaign.
They both can't be right.
I think they can.
Really?
I've heard of two people being right, actually, a number of times. Maybe we'll see it on the panel today. So Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump all talked about income inequality during the primaries. And it was something that was very successful, specifically for Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, more so than it was for Hillary Clinton. So I think it's smart, but then it's also smart to talk about the numbers. I just think that this late in the game, you know, what Steve Wynn's talking about isn't going to make much of a difference. I don't think that people are buying the argument that Donald Trump is for the little guy more than Hillary is and the Democrats.
Well, he is lowering taxes for everybody. Right? That's
mostly for himself.
We can have a long debate about the economy and behavioral economics, but the truth of the matter is that we do best as a nation when we have an aspirational working class. That's the family I grew up in, and you have a burgeoning middle class. We don't have either of those things right now. You get those things when you revise the tax code, you simplify it, and you create energy in the economy, Neil, to grow for everybody. Now, the bad news is for the Democrats, the rich get richer in that situation, and so they prey on people's emotions by using this talking point of fair share. But what we really need to do is focus on what works, not the emotion, the real policies. And the policies that work are let's energize the economy and create the aspirational middle class and working class that we grew up in.
Well, we're told, not Jessica here, but we're told, Kenny, that the middle class resents the upper class and that they've been piling up the loot and everyone else has been suffering.
Yeah, but fomenting this environment of jealousy does nothing to grow the economy, and that's what you want. You want to create an environment where more people can make more money. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't understand this mentality we've got, and Jessica's right, it's happening on all sides of punishing the rich and fanning the flames of jealousy with this emotionalism.
Right.
Because, you know, overtaxation and overregulation has created the environment that we're in. What does that mean? It means we've got too much government, we've got too much government spending, and we've got too many more programs on the horizon. What is that going to do? It's going to punish the middle class. And then you've got Hillary Clinton not only talking about 6 rates in the corporate tax system, but you also have her talking about a huge soda tax that also punishes the middle class, and it doesn't balance the budget, it doesn't service the debt. What it does is create an environment for more spending, exacerbating the problem.
But it's actually, in this case, and I agree with you about a lot of that, but what I would say is if you look at the appraisals of these plans, and you're talking about the debt should be a much bigger deal than it is right now. It's actually Donald Trump that's adding over $5 trillion, and she's adding $200 billion. $200 billion is still a lot of money.
They don't know what things
according
will be
to
next
Americans
week,
for Tax Reform, it's $1 trillion over 10 years, according to Americans for Tax Reform, and that is based on her math.
But, you know, guys, I think
it's going to slow down the economy.
Right, we can have a field day looking at. You're right. I've read those 10-year forecasts. Oftentimes they're inexact, to put it mildly. But leaving that out of it, are you for this notion that you can forcibly narrow the gap between the rich and poor by doubling the minimum wage, let's say, and then on the higher income folks, guys like Scaramucci, just have them pay through the nose? In other words, force it out, bring up a top state tax of 65%.
No, you know, I think the rich are already paying a lot, obviously.
But you think they're paying their fair share?
I think that there's some people who are not. I think that if we closed a lot of these
fair share to you?
Well, I mean, fair share, if we look at it, I think, you know, it's at 39% right now, and then it would go up on the top earners to 43%.
It's at 43.4%.
There's a Medicare
Obamacare tax on top of that.
Listen, I understand that it's a lot, but I don't think that we can redistribute our way out of everything, and I think that is a problem with the Democratic platform. I don't want to keep badging this point, but I raised this with Bernie Sanders a long time ago when he reminded me the top rate used to be 90%, adding that we have a long way to go. Under a Republican. My only point is,
post-World War.
Do you think that that's where we should go?
I don't think we should go that high, and I think that is
89%.
87, I think, is fair.
Yeah.
But I think that's all why Bernie Sanders is not the candidate. I don't think that people subscribe to the theory we don't want to be a socialist nation. But people do want to know that there's a social
I'm looking
safety.
around.
Neil, can I add something very quickly about fair share? The notion of fair share, it is, Steve Wynn is right, it's so hypocritical. What about our fair share? What fair share are we getting from the government when we're paying so much in taxes? And that's the point. Like, we're paying into a system that is already so corrupt and so circular. What are we getting back from it? I think we have the right to ask if we are paying so much in taxes and expected to pay so much more, what more is government going to do for us when it's gotten us into this pickle? The president's own admission, Obamacare has essentially failed.
Well, you know,
No, it's just a starter home. It has not failed.
If that's a starter home, it's been burned to the ground.
I wouldn't mind if I got a lot of bang for my buck.
Yeah, well, listen, it's not going to happen. Okay, George W. Bush, his father, understood that when he raised taxes, just went into more deficit spending. But the third largest city in France, Neil, you know what that is? It's London. Okay, that's because they're taxing the bejesus out of these people.
Right.
Okay?
That was
We got to cut this nonsense out and focus on what works as opposed to the emotion of the situation.
All right.
We do know that trickle down doesn't work, though.
Someone's trickling something here.
Who's talking about that? It's a tax cut. It's a broad-based tax cut for everybody.
The assumption is that rich people will put it
because they're ignoring this.
Well,
after this. All right, I just want to focus on the left of the screen there. This is the scene in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania now, a major economic address by Donald Trump. And we are getting some hints about what he'll be discussing, supposedly a 10-point plan to lift the economy and the American spirit, which will include changing immigration rules to give unemployed Americans an opportunity to get those good-paying jobs, cancel rules and regulations that ultimately send a lot of jobs overseas, lift restrictions on energy production, repeal and replace job-killing Obamacare. This is where you know it's coming from Donald Trump because there's the added line here, it is a disaster. So it could be vintage Trump, could be a great moment, it could be, a lot of his people say, Lincoln-esque. We shall see. All right, Garrett Tenney joining us right now to give us an update on all these cyber attacks we saw yesterday that hit virtually every major popular consumer site, even Amazon. So if you were trying to order something, you were briefly stalled, as you were on Netflix, as you were on Airbnb. I could go on and on. Garrett with the update. Garrett.
Yeah, Neil, there's nothing that can make folks quite upset as taking away their Netflix and their Twitter and their Spotify. The internet went ablaze yesterday when these attacks happened, and while it still isn't clear who was behind these attacks, we are starting to get a better idea of just how they happened. Researchers at a pair of cybersecurity firms have now confirmed the attack used a new powerful program called Mirai to attack the internet service company DYN. Now, DYN servers essentially work like a switchboard, and it directs your computer to the website you type in. This new program, this piece of malware that was used in this attack, it allows hackers to take over hundreds of thousands of devices that are connected to the internet, like your internet router, web cameras, and even the DVR on your TV. All of these things use the internet. Then hackers use these devices almost like a big crowd of people trying to squeeze through the front doors of a shopping mall at the same time on Black Friday. And they are simply able to shut down websites by flooding them with requests from those hundreds of thousands of devices all at the same time. Earlier on Fox and Friends, cybersecurity analyst Morgan Wright gave this example.
We've turned everything into a computer now. Your smartphone, your smart refrigerator, your IP connected, to the internet surveillance camera, DVRs, like you said. All of these things now have become an army of ants that are creating this deluge of traffic, and it's overwhelming these resources in a way they never anticipated.
Now, while neither DYN nor the Department of Homeland Security have identified who was behind the attack, WikiLeaks is now suggesting it came from some of its supporters in response to reports that the U.S. pressured Ecuador to cut off WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's access to the internet this week. Yesterday evening, WikiLeaks tweeted, "Mr. Assange is still alive and WikiLeaks is still publishing. We ask supporters to stop taking down the U.S. internet. You proved your point." Shortly after that, the attacks on DYN stopped. The scary thing about all of this, Neil, is that over the last year, cybersecurity analysts have been warning that these kinds of attacks are growing in their size, strength, and duration, and they expect that trend to continue going forward.
Not encouraging. All right, Garrett, thank you very, very much. At that moment, if it were me, I'd be crying. That's how mean and ugly and horrid John Taffer is on his hit TV show, Bar Rescue. I don't know, John. I saw that, and I really don't even want to talk to you now. I'm kidding, my friend. But I want that same guy who's rough and tumble, very blunt, take no prisoners guy, advised Donald Trump ahead of this speech we're expecting in Gettysburg. He's down in the polls. He's very resistant to advice from a lot of his aides, we are told. Take it from there. How do you rescue him?
First of all, he has to own the failure that his campaign is experiencing. He has to own it. So I would suggest that this speech have three things, Neil. Has to be simple, narrow, and succinct. And what I mean by narrow, he can't say it's a disaster. He can't say our leaders are losers. He can't say they're stupid. I believe that as an individual, he's lost this campaign. His chance today is to win it with issues. And the more he adds his anecdotes, the less about the issues it becomes, and the more about him it becomes. And if this is a referendum on him, at the moment, he's in trouble.
Just got a tweet from Donald Trump. Taffer's such a loser. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You know, a lot of people, they don't like getting, you know, critical advice, blunt advice like you do on your show. The ones who don't listen to you or are reluctant, sometimes you're dealing with family-run operations where the son might be amenable, but the dad isn't, or vice versa. How do you deal with them?
Well, you know, it's sort of what I just said. You know, people that are in that position blame their failure on something else. You know, Trump can blame it on a rigged system. He can blame it on a videotape that came out. But when you own a business or running a campaign, you have to blame failure on yourself. If you don't, Neil, you have no reason to change. If Trump understood he is the issue, not his policies, then he could address that. But he won't take that directly. He passes that off to something else. Then he doesn't change.
But, you know, he is right in this regard. The media does have it out for him. Maybe he inspired that, or maybe they just don't like him. But the coverage he gets is 10 times meaner than anything Hillary Clinton gets. Are you saying that he just accept that, deal with that, move on from that, or what?
Neil, when he had those good few weeks, he had the same amount of coverage, and it was positive. He hands them the gun to shoot him with. That's those anecdotes, those phrases, those little adjectives that he drops in. That's why he really needs to stay narrow in what he says. And I think that could make a difference. If he keeps it about issues, not himself, he has a chance.
But part of his charm is what got him the nomination, this very blunt, in-your-face, even calling out opponents and, you know, little Marco and all that other stuff. It worked for him. It's clearly not working on the national level if we're to believe these polls. So you'd be essentially telling him whatever got you nominated isn't working now, right?
Well, that only got him to 40%, Neil. It didn't get him to 51%. We're talking about getting him to that 51%. And obviously, he can't pull away the people he's got. But if he doesn't pull in women, Hispanics, African Americans, and broaden his base, he's in trouble. And he's not going to do it with the kind of anecdotes he's using.
All right. John, we'll see if he heeds your advice. I know he watches us. He loves us. What's not to love? All right, John, we'll see what happens. Thanks. Good seeing you again.
Same here, Neil. Take care.
All right, we are moments away from hearing Donald Trump. You know, that's a lot of sound advice. You know, they did polls on this issue that on issues, most Americans actually agree with those spelled out by Donald Trump. So the message is fine. How do you deal with the problems with the messenger? We'll ask Pat Buchanan, because he's here, and he's next. All right, an eye-popping deal to tell you about. AT&T has reportedly agreed in principle, they always couch it with that, to buy Time Warner, home, of course, of CNN, HBO, TBS, TNT, Warner Brothers Film, Harry Potter, for $85 billion. Charlie Gasparino on the phone with us now. Why now, and who else is in play in a suddenly hot media sector? Hey, Charlie.
How you doing, Neil? Listen, Jeff Hughes, the CEO of Time Warner, has been shopping this thing for at least 2 years. He's received interest from everybody from normal cable providers like AT&T to a lot of people in Silicon Valley, like Google and Apple. The story I reported a couple of years ago. right before, by the way, I got thrown out of Sun Valley. Put a fine point on that. At the media conference there. And AT&T is the latest one to step up to the plate. Here's the issue right now. Does AT&T have the financial wherewithal to buy it? Can they pay enough to satisfy what Bukes wants, which is essentially a fairly significant premium over the current trading price? And does Bukes now have to sell? And those are the three sort of dynamics that are in work right now. A lot of people think that there's a lot of uncertainty going forward with the market. So if Bukes is going to do anything, now's the time to do it. And he's got a willing player to step up to the plate, someone that's willing to pay a lot of money. We should point out that AT&T is a huge company. It's a $260 billion market cap. It could easily borrow the money and finance this deal through stock and some borrowing. The one sort of fly in the ointment is the shareholders of AT&T do not like this. So, I don't think
they didn't flip over DirecTV either, right? I mean, the company was losing its sight. Could I ask you, though, about the rest of the deal, the rest of the whole sector in play? And, the Journal and others reporting, there was a time when Apple was kicking Time Warner's tires, so Apple might do something, maybe not with Time Warner, but that the whole field is in play. What do you make of that?
It's been in play for 2 years. And Bukes is held, particularly Time Warner, because it's considered to have decent content. I mean, really good content.
Well, with the exception of CNN, but I know your point.
Yeah, they're lousy. But in any event, they make money. And
absolutely.
I think that's a bigger thing. And I think that type of content is very appealing to across the board, both to a traditional cable provider and someone like Apple and Google who are looking to get into content. And here's the real interesting thing. Apple and Google could probably pay cash for this thing. Okay, they don't have the management to run it as well. It's just they're Silicon Valley. AT&T doesn't really have the cash to pay for this thing, but it does have.
But they have a very large credit line. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate you calling in. In the meantime, we are focusing on some other players there that are getting a lot of attention, including Netflix and Discovery Communications. They've been sort of fashioned as next in play. Who knows? It's crazy, and they're moving fast. Still waiting for Donald Trump, Pat Buchanan, on what he's got to say. All right, it will be Donald Trump's Gettysburg Address at a location not too far from where a fellow named Lincoln made a famous 2.5-minute speech. Donald Trump trying to work the same magic to rally Republicans and Democrats and a lot of voters to a 10-point plan that will make America great again. Who better to sort of handicap all of this than Pat Buchanan, who was there for Abraham Lincoln's speech and is with us now to share his wisdom on this one. Patrick, very good to have you, my friend. How you doing?
Doing fine. I'm an old Nixon-Reagan speechwriter.
There you go. See, I knew that. That's the having you here. Right. You know better than most how important a key-worded speech with just the right tone, just the right approach can matter. So if you were to write this for Donald Trump now, what would you be writing? What would you be telling him to say?
Well, the first thing I would say is we need something dramatic because we want to capture Sunday morning headlines all over the country, because this something on cable on Saturday at noon is not going to do it alone. So you want something dramatic. So I would say let's go.
Whoa. You're minimizing the pull that we have to continue.
Okay, they taping you, Neil, and they'll show it again at prime time tomorrow.
Go ahead.
But that's what I'd do. I would grab the Sunday morning press headlines, and I would do it this way with, say, three things. One, I would say, here's what I'm going to do in my first 100 days as president, and have them hard and fast. Also something new and fresh and different than what's been said before, so that you do have a legitimate headline. Also, take a look at your broad coalition. It is nationalist populist, which is very strong and powerful with Trump. Right. It is also Ted Cruz conservative. And it's also, Mitch McConnell, traditionalist type conservatives. So I would try to bring them all together. Now, what does that, of course, is the economic issue, the taxes, the regulations, and all of that. And I would put them all together, and I would say, instead of being of, by, and for the people as we were back in Lincoln's day in 1863, this is a country too much has become of, by, and for a corrupt establishment. And here's the way we're going to clean it up.
That's very good. That's very good.
It's not bad.
You might have a future this. Here's how I would go.
You're on short notice.
I would go the Lincoln way. And bear with me, because, you know, I read a prompter for a living, so I think I qualify.
Right.
I'd make it 2.5 minutes. I'd make it 2.5 minutes, be done with it. Make a powerful point.
All right, you know, let me contradict you on this sense.
Okay.
Lincoln did go up there, and he did speak. Edward Everett was as you know, at Gettysburg, spoke for 2 hours, the great speaker.
Right.
I assume they all came to hear. Lincoln's speech was not carried much at all. It was not given much consideration. Matter of fact, it was almost years later that people began to write into
you're right.
it.
The media at the time panned
you
it.
give a
actually.
2.5 minute speech and he'll get the news all right.
Yeah.
They will say, Donald's got nothing to say. He's got no explanation. He's got no real agenda. So Lincoln did that. I mean, Lincoln presumably did that for the ages. It was, I mean, it's a speech, I think, frankly, wasn't as good as his second inaugural, which was equally short, which was just unbelievable. But Lincoln was writing for the ages. Trump's got to write right now to influence people who appear, and a nation that appears about to vote against him and for Hillary Clinton. To do that, you've got to get the Sunday morning papers, you've got to get the News Tonight, you got to get not only Cavuto, you've got to get people talking again. So that's why I think something new and fresh, for example, the first 100 days, clip, 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 and fresh material in there. That's what I would do. I mean, just
well, that's why I say you should not do it in 2.5 minutes. You've got to go long on this.
Sure.
Exactly. But here's what I think could be a problem. If it's a laundry list or a 10-point plan, knowing how the media doesn't flip over him, and he's right to talk about how that is rigged. Media coverage is always against it. The voting thing, you know, is another issue. But I think what he said about that. So how do you go over the heads of those guys who will pan no matter what you're doing, to say, you know what, this makes a lot of sense?
No, you got to go. The truth is, you describe the reality. You have to go through the media. I mean, like it or not, the media are a hostile, if you will, you know, a hostile membrane or a hostile window pane through which you have to direct your message. Right. Now, you can force them to cover it if you've got something new and dramatic and strong. Now, let me give you an example. One speech I wrote a long time ago. Spiro Agnew's speech attacking the networks.
Right, right.
And they took it, it was all fresh and new, but they put it on the air, and he got through it all, and the country saw it all before the commentators could get on and say, this is horrible, a violation of the First Amendment, et cetera. So that's what Trump needs to do, to punch through a hostile media to the country that is now already going to the polls and doing write-ins and all the rest of it.
Why do so many, not only presidents, but presidential candidates use the Gettysburg venue? About 6 U.S. presidents did. Obviously, Dwight Eisenhower built a home there. What is it that draws them to that site? And
well, you know, again, it's the speech, again, the Gettysburg Address, I'm not going to say it was not a great speech, but it really, what it did is, it remade the nation. If you take a look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Federalist Papers and the Pledge of Allegiance, I mean, all those documents, the word equality is not in them. The word equality is not in them. Democracy is not in them. What Lincoln was doing was saying, I'm going to remake the nation, and equality now becomes elevated to a much higher plane in American politics and American life. There's a great dispute among neoconservatives and traditional conservatives, et cetera. What was the nation intended to be? Was it fought for liberty and independence and sovereignty, a new people? Or was this some new experiment that's supposed to go out to the world and we're going to start on this crusade to change all mankind? In other words, aspects of the French Revolution, which was designed not only for France, but the revolution was to be carried worldwide. So it's enormously important. And Lincoln, in a way, remade the nation, or tried to remake it in the way he desired in the Gettysburg Address. And frankly, intellectuals and others, post the Gettysburg, after he was dead, they were saying, this is what America is all about. It's all about equality. And frankly, ideologically, that argument has basically prevailed.
That's well put. And you're right. The media at the time, what there was of it, disparaged the speech. Thought it was, I think it's a New York Telegram, I think it was, said blessedly short.
Yeah, and I think some folks like the Chicago papers and other papers say, wait a minute. This isn't what we're fighting for. We're fighting to preserve the Union. What's he talking about?
Right. Was he being a bit too premature to sort of praise the other side? Pat, always fun. Thank you, my friend.
Okay. Thank you.
Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is the scene. Peter Ducey is there. You know, Peter, it is interesting when you think of all the presidents who have used this as a backdrop. And I was going through this: Rutherford B. Hayes, Teddy Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, LBJ, JFK. Wow, you know?
Yeah, and Neil, Donald Trump's campaign is not dancing around the symbolism. They say that Trump wants to come here because this is where the Gettysburg Address happened, and that's the time that President Lincoln, one of the greats, obviously, who both candidates have invoked his name recently, gave a speech that united the nation, and they say that is what Trump is going to do. He is a little bit late, but we do expect him to be here within the next couple of minutes. We don't believe that he's on site yet here in Gettysburg, and this is a slightly different kind of feel than most of the big rallies that he has. This was not open to the public. It's a bunch of invited guests. They're all in mostly sport coats and basically their Sunday best, even though it's Saturday, as though they were coming to a banquet that would normally be held at this banquet hall. The only exception, of course, to the dress wear that people have on is a lot of Make America Great Again hats. The teleprompters are up, though, and we do think that the nominee will be here to give the 10 principles that are most important to him for the first 100 days, along with some proposals about how to either make them happen or fix them just a few minutes from now. Neil?
Peter, dumb question on my part, but you're used to that. Why isn't it outside? Now, I know in the New York metropolitan area it's been raining, but wouldn't it be more dramatic to be right outside there? Some of the more famous speeches post Abraham Lincoln have been virtually all outside.
It probably would be more dramatic. This is obviously one of the most beautiful places to come and visit on the East Coast. But we were outside all morning, and it is very breezy. And the forecast has been kind of ominous for the last day or two for this part of the country. So we are inside. It is the familiar backdrop. They've just got the blue and white Trump Pence Make America Great Again with the flags and the podium. So any of the drama is going to have to come from the nominee and not from the backdrop, which he seems to know how to do.
Yeah, he does. He's pretty good at this stuff. We'll be waiting. Thank you, Peter. All right. In the meantime, while we're waiting for Donald Trump's speech, did you hear what Vice President Biden had to say about Mr. Trump, and Michael Moore had to say about Mr. Trump, and so many others? If he's considered a lost cause, why are they talking him up? Maybe because they're nervous? After this. All right, we're following two concurrent events. On the left, of course, in Circleville, Ohio, we have the vice presidential candidate, Governor Mike Pence. On the right, still waiting to hear from Donald Trump. My producer brought up a very good point. Why would you be bumping up against the guy on the top of your ticket who's planning a major speech, unless you're assuming the guy on the top of your ticket is going to be late getting there in Gettysburg to make said speech? But anyway, we're following all that very, very closely. And we're also following how Democrats increasingly are sounding cocky about polls that look good for them. There's no guarantee they've won this. No one's voted yet. There's a lot of talk about undecided voters, that momentum could shift easily. Yet when I've heard Joe Biden and Michael Moore talking with such vitriol about the campaign and the candidate, is it really worthy of this kind of comment from the Vice President of the United States? Take a look.
Press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym.
Yeah, tough guy, yeah. I don't know, really. All right, and then Michael Moore, quote, people who normally vote Democrat who are thinking of voting for Trump, I want them to think about the damage they could do by being a legal terrorist on November 8th. I think there was another Hollywood site that said he's a fascist. And what? All right, so maybe they just protest too much. Do they worry that maybe these polls might not be accurate, that maybe Donald Trump does have a chance? What's going on? Democratic strategist Chuck Roach is here, Fox Business Network's very own Kennedy, Young America's Foundation's Emily Jasinski. Kenny, what do you think? Why this obsession?
It is an obsession, and it's very negative. And, you know, I get really sick of both sides saying that this campaign has gone in the gutter, there's too much mudslinging, when they're both participating in it.
They're both doing it.
But, you know, what is Joe Biden saying? He's either being very kinky or he's alluding to a violent act, which is unacceptable for someone who has the second highest office in the land. I understand Joe's upset because he didn't jump into the pond when he had his trunks on and people wanted him to get into the race for the presidency. You know, he's always going to have non-buyer's remorse. That's not my problem. You know, we've got enough to worry about with the state of the economy, trying to raise our kids and, you know, actually trying to make the country a better place without all this negativity. Slow down, bro. That's what I say.
Slow down, bro, is right. The kinky thing we'll talk about later.
All right.
Chuck, you know a lot of these guys, and they're, if the polls are so good for them, and they keep arguing that, you know, Hillary Clinton is going into a lot of these Republican states to run up the vote, I guess, and it anticipates a landslide, then you don't have to do crap like this, right?
That's right. And let me tell you a little bit about the tactics. I'm never going to come on your show, Neil, and try to be an expert in finance here and around the country, because that's your thing. Let me tell you a little bit about the tactics that
you're just honest, but go ahead.
Right. Let me tell you about the tactics behind what's happening now. Democrats are worried about our base showing up. So what you're doing is you're throwing out red meat because people are starting to vote right now. Just like Donald Trump in Gettysburg right now, he needs to rally Republicans around him. He's got the disenfranchised. He got the people who are fed up. They're going to vote. He's trying to get people to come back based off of policies. Democrats are throwing red meat out, trying to worry about the base showing up. People of color,
does that bring the
educated people
base
in the
out to
suburbs.
say nonsense like that? I mean, I don't know. It just sounds so arrogant.
I'm going to make a point to the vice president, not address Michael Moore, who's got a movie coming out this week, who wants to be in the headlines. But with the vice president, you may step. For this just in, we're talking about Joe Biden maybe stepping over the bounds a little bit. Yeah, he got riled up. He may have said something he regrets saying later, but they're trying to get people to actually show up and vote. Okay. The negativity may drive out the base, or it may not. That's yet to be seen.
All right. You know, Emily, to Chuck's point about people voting, and many 4 million plus who already have voted, what does this do, this kind of talk?
Well, I certainly hope that talking about calling Trump voters terrorists and talking about beating up the other candidate isn't what turns out the liberal base. If it is, you heard it here, I guess. But I think, you know, what's interesting to sort of add to what Chuck is talking about is we get kind of wrapped up in the news of the day. But when you step back, I mean, this is a candidate, Hillary Clinton, who has been investigated by the FBI over the course of this entire campaign season. She's been investigated by Congress. She actually struggled to win a primary against a weak candidate. So when you take the scope of the entire election in, yeah, I mean, they're nervous for reasons that you can just sort of draw out on paper. She's never been popular to begin with. So it's easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day, but when you step back and look at this whole election, both candidates are unpopular and they're both nervous on either side. So I think that's where this is coming from. I hope that's not what turns out voters.
You know, it's interesting, Kenny, when Lee Carter was here, tracks these polls, she tracks momentum. And it's not universal, but in some states, the momentum has the free fall for Donald Trump has stopped. He's picking up a little bit. Hillary Clinton kind of stays around that 45% in and out level. Now, maybe they're over-obsessing. Maybe Lee is over-obsessing. Maybe I'm over-obsessing that. But
impossible.
Obviously, the polls in the aggregate aren't the story. It's about what's happening on the ground. What are you hearing is happening on the ground?
It's interesting because, you know, you keep hearing that perhaps there is a huge number of Trump voters out there who are either not answering the phone when pollsters call, or they're still too embarrassed to be honest about who they're voting for president. And, you know, we've seen these stories about marriages being torn apart and people losing friends on social media when they come out and say, oh, you know, this candidate has an interesting position. And then there's a social media pylon and people get bullied. So I think in that sense, like, if there really is this big silenced pocket, that could make Election Day very, very interesting. We've seen the 3 debates. It feels like the scandals are behind us. And now these candidates have 2 weeks to really sell a positive plan and a positive message. That's their choice. Are they going to keep it in the economic lane? If Donald Trump can do that, if he really can come out today, and this is the basis for a focused policy push, then you better believe that 2 weeks is enough to shift that momentum.
Does it help or hurt, Chuck, then when the either Vice President Biden or the Hollywood big stars come out to sort of pile on here?
You know, I was out in Vegas for the debate, and it's funny, you mentioned Lee, and she's a friend of mine, too, and I was going over some of the numbers with her. Unlike a lot of the pundits, we're running campaigns right now within my firm in about 20 states on the ground where we get to actually interact with people, which is my favorite part of the job. There's a lot of angst out there on both sides, and we've talked about this, Neil, of people feeling that they don't have any representation. Now, when you see a star come out or Joe Biden say something that he regrets, does that really affect the base? I don't think it does, but in the middle, that woman who's sitting at home in the suburbs of Philadelphia, worried about national security, she may not be a liberal, she may not be a conservative, she's just a working mother who's trying to make it. How does that really affect them? That's the little bit of core, and I think that's why you see Donald Trump in Gettysburg this morning. He needs to refocus his campaign not on what he's saying, but on the issues that she wants to hear about.
All right. The only riddle here is whether Donald Trump shows up in a top hat, you know, a Lincoln reference there. Okay, fine. More to this. All right, you're looking at the vice presidential candidate and Indiana Governor Mike Pence. He is addressing supporters in Circleville, Ohio. Still waiting for Donald Trump, of course, in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And we're getting ready to be watching in Panama City, Florida, Bill Clinton campaigning on behalf of his wife. She has been benefiting substantially from some party luminaries, from Barack Obama to Michelle Obama, and of course her husband, in a pinch for the Democratic nominee. All right, how is all this sorting out? George Allen, the former Virginia governor and senator, Trump supporter. Governor, I know Donald Trump will be coming to your state. Polls there supposedly took that state out of reach for him. You disagreed then when I talked to you, and even now. So you think he could turn Virginia around?
Well, it is possible. He'll be going down to the Hampton Roads area that has a strong military presence and a lot of veterans' families, and he does well with veterans. I do want to make a historical point here, Neil. Your show's The Cost of Freedom, and Mr. Trump's going to be speaking at Gettysburg, where Abraham Lincoln talked about the new birth of freedom. So it's perfect that the Cost of Freedom show is paralleling somewhat to it, and I think
that is brilliant, Governor, brilliant.
Well,
thank you.
Well, there you are. You're an historic show, and you are a birth of freedom and freedom of expression. And I think that Donald Trump, what he needs to do in this, I think, very important address. I wish this address and this kind of positive focus was being done months ago. But at Gettysburg, there are a lot of parallels, understanding the foundational principles of our country. And I think these are the ideas that propel a lot of people for Donald Trump, and I think participation in our representative democracy. And Abraham Lincoln, in that Gettysburg address, talked about this nation being founded on the principle that all men are created equal. And that takes from Thomas Jefferson, a great Virginian's Declaration of Independence from when we seceded from the British monarchy, and we have certain God-given natural rights, and freedom of religion's one of them, freedom of expression, the natural right of self-defense, and the Second Amendment property rights, as well as the rights and prerogatives of the people in the states. Donald Trump should remember the First Amendment and never, ever again talk about anyone based upon their rights being diminished on account of their religious beliefs. But I think a government of and by and for the people doesn't mean unelected, unaccountable bureaucracies run and limit our lives. And I think those are the sort of things that Donald Trump could do in the first 100 days, including rescinding or amending any executive order from the current president.
Are you worried, Governor, when you talk to some of your fellow Republicans, some of whom just don't like Mr. Trump? And I almost get the sense that they'd rather, stab themselves in the eyes than see, Donald Trump as the nominee, and that they're jinxing him.
Well, look, I was originally for Marco Rubio.
Right.
The choice now is between Hillary Clinton, who is an untrustworthy liberal whose policies would clearly harm our country, whether it's regulations, taxes, against energy development in our country, versus Donald Trump, someone who is a successful businessman. I have some reservations with him, but I'm going to go with a successful businessman because I think his ideas to make our country more competitive for manufacturing, to rein in these piles of red tape and regulations. He's for productive energy policy.
No, he has a lot of great ideas. No, you're right. He has a lot of great ideas, and he might outline them. But what I wonder
And it's
about is
foolish.
their
It's
argument
foolish
to
for us.
divorce themselves from him, which might, as you indicate, be premature, is that they want to protect the House and the Senate. But by running against him and ignoring him, aren't they doing just that? Aren't they handing the Senate and the House over to the other party if they abandon their presidential nominee?
I hope not, because I think a lot of focus is on House races and some of these very tight Senate races. It seems to me that what folks ought to be doing, whether it's Donald Trump or any of these candidates, is focus and accentuate the positive and constructive. I think people are yearning for positive ideas to be for, and hopefully Donald Trump will be able to do that in his speech today at Gettysburg. And my view is you got to respect the will of the people who voted in all these primaries. And this is our starting nominee. And so if you don't have something good to say about him, and you can certainly distance yourself or disassociate oneself with any of the statements he's made, that and I've done that through it. Nonetheless, at the end, at the election day, there's a choice between, in effect, two candidates, and sure, McMullen and others are running, but that's the choice. And so I see no reason to go out of the way to spend more time criticizing one another rather than ideas that most people would say would move our country forward with, better competitiveness, more jobs, more security, a variety of things that people care about rather than just intra-squad sniping or having people in the dugout and your own batters at the plate and you're heckling them. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
To me.
It doesn't seem, it defeats the purpose. But far be it for me to advise the party.
Far be it for you. You advise everyone all the time, Neil, and we like it.
You got me
have
there.
Good
You
sense.
got me there. All right, but mostly it concerns buffets. But Governor, thank you very much. Good seeing you again.
Great being with you, Neil.
All right, still waiting on Donald Trump. Looking at Bill Clinton in Florida right now, speaking on behalf of his wife. The battle is on. Two key battleground states. After this. All right, Gettysburg, a historic location. We're ready for an historic speech on the part of Donald Trump. Dotting the I's, crossing the T's. Ahead of that, he's running very late here, but we are keeping an eye on it, where the Trump campaign has already telegraphed this is a biggie. This is a sort of a first 100 days of my administration and what I'll be looking to do. Historian Larry Sabato, great professor on what we can expect. The locale is important. I understand that. But does it set up high expectations, because that's where he's doing it?
Well, of course it does. You remember when Lincoln came up in the second debate, Neil, and of course it was Hillary Clinton who raised Lincoln. I think she wishes she could take that back because of the retort from Donald Trump at that moment. Actually, Neil, I remember the Gettysburg Address. I was right there, and I'll tell you, I've heard you accuse other people of it this morning, so I wanted to let people know I was really there. And you know what happened? I actually criticized that speech for being too short. So it just goes to show
he did,
that
right? Then he did, and obviously it took on this new allure afterwards, which is fine. But
the commentary of the moment often is inaccurate, Neil, and that's the point I wanted to make there.
All right. So the commentary
of the moment, the setting is important.
Absolutely. Commentary of the moment is that Donald Trump, to hear the pollsters tell, doesn't have a chance. You've crunched some numbers that say that Hillary Clinton could be on the verge of a blowout. Is there anything in your data that talks about a shift, a Brexit-like shift, a Columbia voters shift, when they had that agreement with the rebels and all of a sudden what was thought to be easy passage by voters there turned into rejection? Is there anything like that percolating?
Nothing that I've heard that is percolating, but of course the really big things that change election campaigns in late October, early November are big in part because they're totally unknown, and they're sprung upon us by the powers that be. So I have no idea if there is such a thing or if it's even possible to shift it at this moment, because remember, Neil, there are so few undecideds. This is a stark choice. And the vast majority of people, and I mean 95, 96, 97%, know for whom they're going to vote. And if they're questioning their vote, it's probably between one of the major party candidates and one of the minor candidates.
Really?
That's
so you
where
don't
most
buy
of the
that,
undecideds are.
I got you. You don't buy that view. I think a Trump spokesman was talking to me earlier. It's saying, you know, there are a lot of people, sadly, who cannot admit they're voting for Donald Trump, but in the privacy of that voting booth, will do just that. Now, the question then, assuming there's some of that, is there enough of that to turn the outcome?
There's no indication there is, but you and I have discussed over many, many years the shy Tory voters in the United Kingdom, and they do exist. They are conservative voters who don't admit they vote conservative. They don't lie. They don't say they're voting for Labour or some other party. They say, I'm undecided, when they aren't undecided. I don't see evidence of that here, in part because the hard undecideds, once you push people to lean one way or the other, the hard undecided is low single digits. So, and you can't assume all of them are for Trump. That's just simply not justified.
Well,
so
what
I don't
turns it at this stage then? But what I mean, I know that Carter Reagan had a debate, and the one and only debate, only days before the general election. But what started that tidal wave that ended up being a rout for Reagan?
Well, there were two events, and you're absolutely correct to point to that debate, which was held 1 week ahead of Election Day. What a giant mistake for President Carter to agree to a debate a week ahead of Election Day. He thought he was going to blow Reagan out of the hall simply because he had been president and knew so much more, supposedly. And then the second event that I think was more influential, that turned a small victory into a big victory, was the collapse of the negotiations with the Iranians for the release of the American hostages on the Sunday before the Tuesday election, less than 72 hours before people went to vote. And it was such a letdown. And I think the Carter administration had thought they were on the verge of their October surprise, that is, getting an agreement to release the hostages. And instead, it turned around and bit them. And that took Reagan's, say, 3-point victory and turned it into a 10-point victory. Pat Cadell has all the data on that, by the way.
I can't wait to get it. That sounds interesting. But I do want to get your idea.
Sometimes you're not very convincing.
No,
you're not very convincing.
But a lot of people have been saying, for this Gettysburg speech on the part of Donald Trump, he's got to be uplifting. He's got to be positive. That he's been, firing off at a lot of folks and all that. And now's not the time to do that. We're told this will be positive. This will be looking at a first 100 days agenda of what President Trump would do. What do you think of that?
This is definitely a moment when Trump should stick to the script. And, take the criticism for reading a teleprompter. Who cares? It's perfectly legitimate at this point in a campaign to make sure that you don't make a misstep. You do not say a word or phrase that will take 3 or 4 days away from you. So stay positive, stay to the big themes, and I think most of them should be the ones he's already identified. This is awfully late to be bringing up a big new issue. I just don't think that would work. So, yes, the setting is right. It's a good time to re-emphasize the issues that brought him to the Republican nomination that have taken him this far, and this is the place and the moment to do it.
Real quickly, this idea that, obviously Pennsylvania, battleground state, he trails by the average of polls, I think around 6 points, maybe more. But lately there's been some bubbling up in his support there. We do know that Governor Pence, I think, is in Ohio right now. Those polls there are fairly even. Of the battleground states, which do you think Trump has a good shot at winning?
His best shot is Iowa. Iowa's been a battleground for a long time, but Trump has done better in the polls there than anywhere. And then I would say second, it would be Ohio. Third would be North Carolina. Fourth would be Florida. Pennsylvania would be way down the list.
Interesting. You might have a future at this, Professor. Keep at it.
Thank you. Not much of one. Very short future. Very short.
You are a gentleman and a scholar. I appreciate it, Professor. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Neil.
All right, we are, well, we're running very, very late. for Donald Trump here. Maybe he's waiting for everything to get done and out of the way. Maybe he's recrafting it. Remember the famous speech with Abraham Lincoln? Is he was writing that on a napkin and redoing it and trying it again and redoing it. And maybe I should say 4 instead. I don't know. But he tortured over that one, and that was only 2.5 minutes. Trump's, we're told, could be at least a half an hour. So you do the math. This could be a while. All right, General Keith Kellogg right now is getting ready to introduce Donald Trump, we are told. I know this seems like we're dragging this out, and no, Donald Trump did not pull an Abraham Lincoln and already give a 2.5-minute address. He's just late, substantially late. And I don't know why, so I apologize for that. But in the meantime, to former Ronald Reagan Budget Director David Stockman on what he wants to hear, actually he's been bemoaning it at both candidates because his big issue is our debt, and it is out of control. And David, you've been arguing for some time, as you join me on the phone now, that you want to hear prescriptions out of the candidates for this. Fortunately, it did come up in the debate with our Chris Wallace, who is as anxious about as you are. I want you to listen to this. Okay, we don't have that, but it was a great exchange on the debt. And he raised it. And I guess what I'm asking you is, it was the first and only time in a debate it was. And that was it. And both candidates essentially punted. What do you think?
Well, I think we're in fiscal fantasy land is what I think. And I believe we're, being subjected to a massive con job about how serious this problem is. Let me give you 3 reasons. One, the national debt was $10.6 trillion when Obama was sworn in. It will be $20 trillion when the next president takes office. That means that in the last 8 years, we've added to the national debt as much as during the first 220 years of the Republic, during the first 43 presidents. That's the first thing. Second, he says he's tamed the deficit. Not true. It's going up. The year just ended with $600 billion, up 35% from the previous year, plus they're using phony accounting. And the truth is, in the last 2 years, we've added $1.7 trillion to the national debt. They didn't count $700 billion of it due to phony accounting. Third, Hillary, in response to that question, flat out lied when she said, I will not add a dime to the national debt. What she said was, I won't add a dime to what's already built in. What she didn't say is in the next 10 years, according to CBO, there's $9 trillion built in already before you do any of her spending program.
But you hit it, people. I didn't want to interrupt, just to make a point.
Yeah.
What we owe dwarfs the GDP of our country. We're getting to that point. How do you get that back to reasonable size?
Well, that was the point I was leading to, because if you take what CBO says is built in, and then you realize that no one has abolished the business cycle, there will be a recession one of these days. We're not going to go for another 10 years without one. If you use not a rosy scenario, but realistic economic assumptions, we will add $15 trillion in the next decade to the $20 trillion of debt we already have. Think about that. That's $35 trillion. The reason it resonates with me is that when I had the job in 1981, we struggled crossing the $1 trillion line.
Wow. Okay,
so in the last less than 3 decades, we've gone from $1 trillion to a built-in $35 trillion. That will be 140% of GDP by the middle of the next decade, and we will be in a circumstance where the baby boom is at full retirement, size, and it's going to be a calamity. And there's total radio silence in this campaign about it. Trump is wrong when he says he can grow his way out of it. I agree with a lot of things he is proposing, but you're not going to grow your way out of it. You have to reform entitlements. You can't keep adding to defense, and we need a better revenue source than the taxes we have today. Hillary has no solution at all. just more of the same. And frankly, she's going to win. The race is over. I know people keep looking for the Brexit vote hidden somewhere. So it's not going to happen. But in a way, there's a silver lining because things are going to blow up in the next 4 years. There will be a stock market crash. There will be a recession. The deficit will be the annual deficit will be back in the plus $1 trillion category very soon, and it will all come down on her head and on the watch of the establishment. And maybe that will wake up the public because it's going to be bad. And what Trump proved in this campaign is that the establishment, will do anything politically to stop a challenge. But if we have the crisis that I know is coming, then maybe this thing can be busted wide open and we have a chance to clear the decks and start again.
All right. On that upbeat note, jeez. All right. You have any sharp instruments over there, guys? I'd like a little more to this. All right. I know what you're thinking. Where is he? I don't know. He's running late. So am I going to give him a talking to? So we're not just trying to string you along here, but as we continue stringing you along, we do want to let you know that an issue that is expected to come up when Mr. Trump does speak in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and outlines his 100-day plan of what we could look forward to in the first few months of a Trump administration, if he is fortunate to get elected president of the United States. Among the things he wants to do is just gut the Affordable Care Act, says it's not affordable, and says the president comparing it to a starter home and the headaches you have to deal with in a starter home apply here, but eventually everything is okay. First of all, in my starter home, they didn't have an MRI machine in the attic that was doubling and tripling for MRIs or CAT scans, but that's neither here nor there. Democratic strategist Jessica Tarlov here, GOP pollster Lee Carter, as Rudolph Giuliani is getting ready to introduce Mr. Trump. So as that's happening, guys, late to you first on pouncing on that. That's obviously the Trump folks have said this polls well for us going after the Affordable Care Act.
Sure. I think, I understand what President Obama was trying to do by making the analogy of starter home. However, what it's really telling everybody is that this is a mess and that we need to walk away from and buy a new home, right? So it's, as we always say, it's not what you say that matters, it's what people hear. So what do people hear with this? That Obamacare isn't working and he's admitting it. That's.
What do you think, Jess?
I agree that I don't think
skyrocketing and everything you promised us isn't working out.
Yeah, me. I'm the only
guilty?
Democrat that promised you anything. No, I think that Lee is right in terms of the terms that he used. And also, when we were talking about this before, there's no major piece of sweeping social legislation that ever worked perfectly out of the gate. And I think that Hillary Clinton has actually played this well. Right now, Americans are divided on the health care law. It's basically an even split of approve and disapprove. So her saying...
Wait till they get a look at the premiums.
I think they've had a look at them. I mean, November 1st could be a bad... Yeah, it is.
State commissioners are giving more to the insurance companies than they're even asking.
I know, and there are going to be, I think it's 37 exchanges that are only going to have one option, which I think is why she's going to go for the public option on the state level, not a single payer system. But
do you think we were all lied to?
No. By a Democrat?
Yeah.
No. I don't.
Really?
I mean, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. That definitely didn't pan out.
Right.
But I think in pursuit of...
Affordable.
Yes, and there definitely have been. I mean, I think that if we could buy insurance across state lines, we'd make a lot of progress here. And I think that that's something that's not a betrayal of the principles.
To scrap it, right? I mean, Trump does.
But he's going to... If Trump's plan, 25 million people will lose their insurance. That's a really big deal. I understand that premiums have gone up.
But all the numbers that were promised to us weren't the numbers that we see. So where are the numbers coming from?
Well, the health care costs actually have risen at a slower rate than they did in the decade before Obamacare. That's certainly
what about these premiums?
The premiums, it's a problem, but that's what Hillary Clinton's struggle is going to be. But Donald Trump's plan and this repeal and replace platform, it's not going to happen.
I think he's reaching to the broader community that says, great for these millions who've gotten health coverage, they didn't have it before. Touche. I'm paying through the nose for it, and I don't like that.
I mean, I see so many freelancers, so many on-demand workers, and that's the direction that we're going, that are paying more than they ever have before.
But Jessica doesn't care for those people, does she?
I hate everyone but myself and President Obama. No, I mean, what do you want me to say? Like, yes, premiums have gone up, but it doesn't mean that the 20 million people who are insured
What
now
do you want to hear out of Donald Trump today? Not the healthcare thing notwithstanding.
Nothing. I want him to be quiet.
Okay.
No, I honestly.
Someone's a hater. Okay.
I think that he should talk policy. Honestly, he did it a little bit yesterday. I don't want to hear lock her up. His voters, not his base, but people who might be swayed, don't want to hear lock her up
anymore. So you want a positive, uplifting kind of, here's your 100-day plan.
Right. I understand that you're in a tough spot. I understand the wages have been increasing at the right rate. This is what I'm going to do for you. I represent change and positive change, even though in the Fox News poll, she's actually leading in that category, which I found astounding.
No, you're right about that.
That is astounding.
Right?
I don't understand it.
No, but it happened,
But do you
and
know,
I'm excited.
Jessica, the Democrats, are they, I mean, the pile-on on him and all this, are they seeing something in the polls that, Lee and I were chatting about it, that maybe isn't readily evident, that this support for Hillary, that this gap in the polls isn't such a sure thing?
No, I don't think so. And I think that the internal polling looks a lot like the public polling, and her being at about, I think, 6.9 as the Real Clear Politics average right now is, about where Obama was in 2008, and that ended up working out pretty well.
What do you think, Lee? There might be something going on there, right?
Well, I mean, I look at things differently, because I do think that there's more undecideds now than there were then, and I think the undecideds, there's something about that I think undecideds might go Trump. That's just my opinion.
I think there's
but you need a lot of them to do that.
You need a lot of them to do that, but we're within the margin of error still.
But there's a lot of embarrassment in admitting that you're voting for Trump.
Absolutely.
I think that is a valid argument. It's not a silent majority like Nixon style, though. I mean, I think that that's overblowing it. But yes, I do think that's overblowing it. He is so disliked, and his unfavorables now in the mid-60s.
Well, Hillary Clinton isn't exactly
but she's
Pope
low
Francis.
50s right now. I mean, which is a big difference between mid-60s. And I think if this continues, and if the Democrats can continue to drive the narrative to be about his behavior, his temperament and demeanor and groping and whatever else, then it's going to be very hard for especially women to vote for him.
The message is not, I'm not Trump.
I disagree with.
Your ballot, your bucks. Now, Neil Cavuto.
All right, we have got a lot going on this morning. Welcome, everybody. Waiting to hear Donald Trump deliver what he's calling his closing argument, his case for what a first 100 days of a Trump administration would be like. And he's doing it on hallowed ground in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from the exact location where Abraham Lincoln delivered about a 2.5-minute speech that goes down in history as perhaps one of the greatest ever. Donald Trump hopes the tide from that and some of the wind at his back and some recent poll numbers will be enough to start sealing this deal. Don't laugh. He thinks he could do just that. We're going to be talking to Pat Buchanan about this, Mark Cuban about this, Steve Wynn about this. Also, some big developments in the corporate world. I don't know if you have AT&T. I don't know if you watch any of the Time Warner channels like, heaven forbid, CNN, TNT, TBS, or you're into any one of the Time Warner film movies like any of the Harry Potter series. It could be a combination, an $85 billion combination. More on that deal and what it could be portending amid talk that AT&T and Time Warner are close to hooking up. There is this other little issue of regulators. All right, let's first focus on the big speech about an hour away. Peter Ducey is there. Peter.
And Neil, this to-do list that Trump is going to give us about an hour from right now, around 11 o'clock Eastern, is happening here in Gettysburg for a reason. And the reason is that this is where President Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address at a time the nation needed healing. And the campaign says Trump thinks that he can make the case for his policies over Clinton's policies in a way that could convince voters to unite around him, the way they did around Lincoln a century and a half ago. So Trump has to get to the White House before any of this happens. And now he is urgently encouraging people in swing states to vote for him today if they can.
Early voting is underway, so make sure you send in your ballot. We cannot take a chance of blowing it. We cannot take a chance. We have something, we're so close. It's a movement like they've never seen in this country before, never, ever seen. Don't blow it on November 8th.
Trump has been hinting recently that he will not accept the results of a close election if he's on the losing end, and half of Republicans are with him because half of Republicans say in a new Reuters poll they would not accept Hillary Clinton as their president, with 70% indicating the only way they think she could win is if there's illegal voting aiding her along. Trump does hold slight leads in several national tracking polls this weekend, but he is playing catch up in swing states, and that's what it's all about. So Pennsylvania does appear to be a priority. He's down 6 and change in the Real Clear Politics average of polls here, but he came to Pennsylvania twice yesterday. He's going to be here once today. He's also hitting Virginia and Ohio this afternoon and this evening. So some swing states are going to get the big final argument from Donald Trump, but we're going to hear it first here in Gettysburg at 11 o'clock. So stay tuned. Yeah.
All right, thank you, my friend Peter Ducey. As Peter's speaking, we are getting dribs and drabs of what Mr. Trump might be outlining today, something like a modern-day contract with America. Remember back in 1994, Republicans charged, before they ultimately took over the House of Representatives, for complete regulatory reform, tax reform, welfare reform, something very similar out of Mr. Trump. He is going to call for immigration reform, regulatory reform, tax cuts, tighter border security, all outlined in what we're told will be about a 10-point plan. And it is said to be Lincoln-esque, hence the Gettysburg location. All right, now the question is whether any of this will reverse what have been some tough polls and certainly a lot of negative headlines. Take a look at how the media has all but put this one away. The Washington Post, Trump is bitter, hoarse, and pondering defeat as Election Day nears. And on as you just look at these headlines. Thank you, Donald Trump. Donald Trump could well go down in history as a feminist hero. In other words, saying that his comments will galvanize the female vote, and he will be buried by it. And as you could see, the idea of an example that Richard Nixon could teach Donald Trump, all but assuming he's going to lose this race, and take a cue from Richard Nixon not to whine about it. Jimmy pollster Lee Carter. Lee, he's in Pennsylvania.
He is in Pennsylvania.
And he trails there by, I guess, depending on the poll, 6 points or so. Normally when candidates trail by that much, they move on to other states. Not all the time. He's not. Why not?
So there's a couple of reasons why. I think the first reason is Pennsylvania is the easiest path to victory for him right now. What he needs to do is a couple of things. First, he has to shore up all those states that Romney won. Then he has to win Florida and Ohio. Then the last thing he has to do is either win Pennsylvania or a series of other small states, and that's going to be a little bit more challenging for him. Pennsylvania has not gone Republican since 1988. It's going to be a challenge for him, but he is within 6 points. The trends right now there are away from Hillary Clinton. He's got a little bit of a bump in recent days, and we also see that there's still a significant number of undecided voters. Depending on the poll, you're seeing between 5 and 10 points undecided. So he's really within the margin of error in Pennsylvania. I also think we're living in a day and age where we're more nationwide. He can go, obviously he can go in person, but these kinds of moments, going to Gettysburg is going to get him a lot of media coverage, and he's able to have a symbolic gesture at that moment saying, he's going to get in front, he's going to give a big speech today that we think is going to be symbolic of what he's going to offer and offer a big plan that can then catapult him in other states. So I think that he's using this both for the symbolism and because his state is really important to him.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what do pollsters look for when you were examining the data coming in from the states? You don't look at what the aggregate number is, but you also look at what the trend is. And she has slipped down a little bit. He's moved up a little bit. And I guess if you're Donald Trump, you want to keep that going. And an address like this could do it. But you have about 2 weeks to close the deal.
So what I look at is exactly what you're saying, the numbers themselves, but also the momentum. Where are things shifting? I also am a big believer in qualitative research, to try and talk to voters and say, what are they saying? I think the most important thing to understand about Donald Trump, and I think this is just, it's not necessarily about the man, it's about the movement. He is representative of an anti-establishment movement.
Plunk it down. $85 billion for Time Warner. Now, this is the same AT&T that not too long ago paid about $50 billion to buy DirecTV. They've got a lot of debt there, a lot of questions going forward as to why now, because this is just one of the bigger deals we've seen either announced or rumored over the last week. A record number of them, and certainly a record amount. What's going on here and what's the rush? To Steve Forbes, Gary Kalpa. Gary, ended with you beginning with what is the rush?
Well, first off, I think you have this easy money that creates low interest rates and high stock prices, so you have the currency. But on top of that, you have companies that are not growing anymore, so they have to look elsewhere to buy. And as you see, like in the British tobacco, their sales are down 11% year over year. So go after Reynolds, who, by the way, bought Lorillard for $27 billion a couple of years ago. And then you add into political front, there's going to be two names that starting in January, it looks that way, and that is Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They are going to be involved a big way in the economy, and they do not like big business, and they are loath to let businesses grow. So I think the rush is on right now, and I think we're going to see more of this, not less.
You know, Steve, normally when the smart money crowd are those who have a lot of money and are making their bets, they're telling us something is about to happen. I don't know whether it's a political response, a sense of the Federal Reserve finally poised to raise interest rates, deals won't be as cheap in the future, but they all seem to be bouncing at the same time. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's been indicated the economy is not growing very much. Growth, there's been a lot of M&A activity, a lot of stock buying back in, financial engineering, and business capital expenditures aren't what they should be. So growth is coming by gobbling up your competitors. And what we have here with what AT&T is doing is the old traditional lines, which have been crumbling anyway, are now crashing down. People are not taking those old packages. Wireless telephony is really hurting right now. Verizon sales of subscribers are going down. So you're looking around your world.
Where people are saying, you know what, enough of the establishment, whether it's Republican or Democrat. For the last 16 years, we haven't had a real strong faith and belief in government. People believe that whether you like Donald Trump or not, he's going to go in and he's going to shake things up and he's going to change things. Now, the question is, do people look at him and say, you know what, I think he's going to do it for the best. I think that I can trust him not to be crazy. I mean, there is this whole stigma that's attached to him.
Read, right? I mean, we're going to rifle through very quickly here some of the latest polls that show even safe states or safe Republican states might not be so safe. Georgia's a big example, almost always goes Republican, and he's barely holding on there. People seize on that in states like Texas and the fact that Ohio is split when he had been up by 3 points, and they say, hey, he's the one losing the momentum. What do you say?
Well, he did lose the momentum. There's no question. But what we've seen in this race, and this has been like unlike anything that we've ever seen before. We have, you know, it's 1 minute it's shifting towards Hillary Clinton. The next week, 10 points over to Donald Trump. The next week, back 10 points to Hillary Clinton. The swings are phenomenal.
But are the swings up or down for him? Because I see Hillary Clinton's numbers, the overall number not changing a lot. It's
her overall number has not changed all that much. At certain points in time it has, but she has pretty much solidly hit herself around 45 right now, and that's where she has stayed. And so it's the undecideds that are up to 10 points, and some states are even up to as high as 20 that are going up and down and really going for him based on news cycles and what people are thinking of him in a moment. The whole label of Donald Trump being dangerous is one that really sticks, and people in moments are looking at it and saying, am I going to trust him to change things for the better, or is it going to be change that scares me and he could be dangerous? And so we're swinging back and forth. It's vacillating. What he needs to do now is stay on message, stay on track, stay calm, cool, and collected, not veer off. You know, he's got to stay the course right now. He's got to have 3 weeks, just like he had those 3 weeks when Kellyanne Conway first joined the campaign. Everything really seemed to stay focused. And he can do it, but he needs to do that to shore things up right now.
All right, Lee, thank you very, very much. In the meantime, in case you woke up this morning, a big merger to tell you about, or at least they want it to be something to tell you about, and that regulators will approve. I am talking right now about AT&T.